Welcome to the Erotic Realm podcast, where we explore the psychology of darker desires. I'm Em, and if you're new here, welcome. I'm a psychosexuality nerd with a background in psychology, sociology, medical science, and Tantra. I'm also in a 24/7 collared relationship, and I created this podcast with the mission of humanizing kinksters. Join me here for one-on-one, in-depth conversations as we explore the fascinating world of eroticism, one erotic realm at a time. If you love what we're doing here in the Erotic Realm, I'd like to ask you a quick favour. Can you follow and rate the show wherever you listen? It helps the show reach more people like you. And if you haven't yet, I'd love if you could subscribe to my Substack, Psychology of Desire. This is where I go even deeper into the science and symbolism of desire, archetypes, and erotic evolution. You'll get access to articles, unique surveys and research, and behind-the-scenes access to everything I'm building. Simply visit psychologyofdesire.substack.com. I'll see you there. And now, for today's episode. The following conversation invites you into the erotic intellect of Lina Dune, writer, educator, and host of the globally celebrated podcast, Ask a Sub. Lina has become one of the most influential voices translating submission for a new generation, one that blends feminism, power exchange, and psychological depth. In this episode, we explore the erotic logic of surrender, why smart, self-aware people crave submission, what it means to find agency inside obedience, and how kink can become a pathway to self-trust rather than self-erasure. We also dive into the edges of CNC, the honesty of consensual non-monogamy, and the paradoxes of feminist desire. Plus, Lina's own reflections on what submission has taught her about power. This is an episode for anyone learning to let go without losing themselves and discovering that surrender can be the most radical form of self-possession. Enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm podcast. Today I'm pleased to be exploring the erotic realm of Lina. Welcome, Lina.
Thank you. I didn't see the Zoom recording in progress thing happen. Are you recording with something else? Sorry.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, how are you? I'm so excited to be here.
Really happy to meet you and to be chatting with you today. So before we dive into the juicy stuff, let's find a bit more out about you and outside the realm of eroticism. What do you get up to when you're not being kinky, such as hobbies and interests?
I've done a deep dive into crochet this year, so
Cool.
that's sort of my hyperfixation. I had to make every possible mistake before I could figure out how to do it even remotely correctly, and even still, it's like barely happening. But I've had so much fun making granny squares and a blanket and hats, and everyone who knows me is getting cuddly crochet things now.
Adorable. So now let's dive into your erotic realm. Who is Lina when it comes to her eroticism and kink?
So, as your listeners may know, I host a podcast relating to kink. So, kink is sort of my entire life, professionally and also personally. And I often describe myself, due to the name of my podcast, it's Ask a Sub. I always describe myself as a 24/7 bisexual submissive, or bisexual 24/7 submissive. So, what that essentially means is that when it comes to my relationship with my Dom, who's also my husband, I'm always in the role of sub, whether that be in our regular day to day life or in our bedroom life. So, I feel like my eroticism holds me very much in the sexual sense, but I'm also a big subscriber to Audre Lorde's definition of eroticism as being sort of present in your body, and it can be erotic to paint a fence if you're being pleasurable about it and in tune with yourself. So I do find my submissive identity sort of transcends the bedroom and holds me everywhere I go.
Beautiful. Now, you've said that your goal in life is to help others explore why they desire what they do. Why do you think that you have this desire?
I think that everyone comes about kinks and desires differently, but I kind of feel like I was cosmically assigned the task of vulnerability because I'm a perfectionist, or I have struggled with perfectionism. I have struggled with people pleasing, and I find that vulnerability has invited me to sort of take responsibility for myself and where I give my power away
Mm,
non-consensually. So I do think that I came to submission with a perception that I was bad and that was something that needed to be punished. And that was sort of my introduction to it. But then the more time I spend, the more it's about learning my essential goodness and finding out what parts of myself I can love and accept as I open up further and further to that vulnerability.
mm. So, how did you discover the kink world? What was that journey like for you?
It came in fits and starts because I very much had the disease that so many people have coming into kink, which is I'm not one of those people.
Mm.
There was sort of a perception, maybe aesthetically or socially, about who kinksters were. Like, I was like, well, I don't like playing board games. And that, since it's turned out not to be true, but, I had this sort of image of who was kinky, and I didn't see myself fitting into that. So, because of that stereotype, I deprived myself of a lot of resources that would have been very helpful to me as I was discovering. But it was only when I met my current Dom, now husband, that I actually took the journey seriously, because he was a responsible kinkster, had been practicing for a long time, and he was not going to do it with someone who wasn't going to be able to own their limits and own what they wanted and be able to talk about their desires in depth rather than just sort of sneaking into it, which many partners had already accepted from me. So once I started looking into it, I realized that the cohered practice of kink had a lot of ways to hold my trauma, or even the pleasure tolerance of being able to accept pleasure and able to go after what I wanted in a clear-eyed way, and not sort of sneaking in that back door of being wrong and needing to be punished for it. So that was sort of the on paper journey. And then in terms of what was going on for me in the beginning, emotionally or desire wise, it was very much this sort of, I don't know, it's hard to describe, like this need to sort of be compressed and like thrown around. Like, I've being
Mm-hmm.
objectified was a big part of it. Like, I just want somebody to sort of crush me like a little Coke can and then throw me around. And so, like, in pursuit of whatever that feeling was, I definitely ended up with a lot of tools along the way once I started pursuing it in a more clear-eyed and respectful towards me manner.
Mm-hmm. So, how did you meet your Dom slash husband? Did you know that he was kinky straight away, or was that something that revealed itself over time?
So we met on Tinder,
Mm-hmm.
and neither of us had anything in our bios about being kinky.
Ah.
And I was very much out there after a very long relationship and a couple of messy things, looking for a Dom. But anytime I matched with a Dom on a dating app, I was like, I can't talk to this person because why would someone want to do this? And what is in him that he wants to spank me, and that might be wrong. And I was just, listen, I
Mm.
was like 25. I was all twisted up about this stuff. But I met my Dom, and we had a mutual friend. It showed us on Tinder. So I was like, okay, so if I get murdered, like someone will know who this guy
Mm.
is, because, dating as a woman is so fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then we showed up to our date, and we were having a really, really wonderful date. And I was thinking in my head, like, okay, this guy may not be kinky. Like, maybe I have to deal with this. Like, that's okay. I can do it. I like him so much that, maybe I don't even need to be kinky, whatever. I'm doing all of this negotiation in my head. And then after the date, we were, starting to get intimate. And I did my move at that time, which is like, ooh, what if you spanked me? And he replied with, "Only if you ask me properly." And I was like, "What?"
Oh.
I like did like my head turned 180 degrees on my neck. And and he was like, "Yeah, I'm a dom, and like I'm, if we're gonna do that, we have to do it after a proper negotiation." And I just like I think I just only, in the movies when an explosion goes off and they only
Hmm.
hear like a ringing sound, that was sort of where my head was at that time. So he was like, "Okay, we're gonna pause this and you're gonna go off and do some research, and then we're gonna have another date where we like properly negotiate." And that was just, I was just spun up into a ball of nerves and excitement after that. And then we proceeded into a very formalized, more high protocol Dom sub dynamic for a while. And then we sort of developed the more emotional side of it after that was sort of a firm foundation, which I think is a big part of why we're still 24/7, because that was our first way of relating to each other.
Beautiful. He sounds like a great Dom. How long have you two been together for now?
We have been together for 8 years
Hmm.
and married for 5.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
congratulations. Beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what led you to start your podcast, to make the leap from this private exploration that you're having with your Dom slash husband to being more of a public voice?
Yeah, it was sort of this blend of factors of me wanting a creative and intellectual outlet outside of my very unsatisfying job in the TV industry, where
Mm.
I just felt like this doesn't, there's many meaningful jobs in media, but the one that I had was not. And I was like, I want to feel like I'm doing something that matters. And I just knew that the way that I was thinking about kink was something I wanted to share because, this has changed radically since I started doing this work. But back in 2019, when I like really took up a public space on the internet, I was mainly seeing education from the Dom's perspective, and that education was always really focused on the fantasy of it. And there was no like, we're people and we go back to work the next day. Like there was a lot of focus on sort of master slave dynamics, which of course are really fun and fulfilling for the people in them. But I just wasn't seeing like, okay, let's level with each other as people and outside of the fantasy and then find our way back in. So that was where I came at it as far as my advice that I was giving initially. And then I started making memes using the media that I like, which is like, Mean Girls or what have you, the more sort of aesthetically pleasing, feminine coded visuals. And I think that gave a lot of people space to see themselves in it and get past that aesthetic hurdle and learn that there's a way to do this that's a little more grounded. And definitely wholesomeness is something that I've consistently brought to it. And after some time on Instagram, only giving advice via, Q&As on my Instagram story, I started the podcast because I wanted to see what it would be like to have the latitude to answer people's questions in long form with more nuance, because giving somebody a 2 sentence answer to a deep problem like might come up in kink was feeling irresponsible at a certain point.
Mm.
So I'm very fortunate that I've been able to transition, doing a lot less work on social media. In fact, almost none on Instagram these days, and just doing the podcast because I sort of don't want to be caught in the trap of diminishing somebody's deep issue to a blurb for content, but
Mm.
instead really take the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you've been doing the podcast for a little while now. What's been your biggest learning from the podcast so far about yourself or about the community that you're speaking to?
It's very much that like Greek myth about you can't step in, or is that a Greek myth? I don't know what it is. You can't step in the same river twice because you're not the same person and it's not the same river.
Mm-hmm.
So when I get a question that I've heard before, I always find in myself a surprising freshness about a question. Like I don't encounter the same question twice, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's worded exactly the same way, because my relationship to kink is always changing, and I see kink as a sort of a microcosm of all of our becoming and wrestling with who we are. So as I, inhabit my wider world and whatever lessons I might be learning in that way, I always bring it home to kink as a place to try it out. So, whether somebody's asking, what does it mean if I want someone to pee on me, or I'm going through a breakup and help, and whatever those things are, I can always find a way to sort of surprise myself by relating to it wherever I'm at that day. And I think my listeners have been really gracious about that sort of authenticity and ever shifting exploration together.
Mm. Okay, well, I'd like to dive back into your eroticism now and chat a little bit more about your submissive self.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to hear, what does submission mean to you currently?
In terms of the erotic submission, to me, currently, it really looks like being open to where I'm at on a given day and not succumbing to a script of what I'm supposed to want based on being submissive
Mm.
and allowing allowing space for however things might show up. And it's almost silly to admit this. Like I'm sure someone thinks you have a podcast about BDSM and it's all that you talk about and you're openly a sub and you're writing Substack essays every week about whatever weird thing you're, horny about. How could you possibly not have parts of yourself that you accept? But there's still parts of myself where I'm like, I can't let my beloved partner of 8 years see this because it's too ugly or too strange.
Mm.
And then it's just I almost feel like I've broken through very recently to a new level of actually internalizing that I'm in a safe space. Like the body needs a lot of time to catch up with something that you intellectually know. And I'm sort of starting to really, really drill down on like, yeah, there's nothing that I can do that will gross people out who I'm, have a respectful play relationship with. Like I would be really excited to discover a new kink of someone that I'm playing with. And I know that people might feel that way about me, but it's just again, it's like this constant rediscovery of that through the practice of actually, the eroticism, uh, the rubber hitting the road in terms of the eroticism.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think that you are submissive?
Mm. Um, hmm.
Do you think you were born this way? Do you think it's something that evolved over time and you perhaps grew into?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that a lot of people come to kink without trauma motivating their kink, but I think for me, at its inception, it was very much like a sideways way of addressing some trauma that I had around my family of origin and
Mm.
having a really negative inner voice that was born out of that situation and having a very hard time believing that I was good. And so it was a way of sort of punishing myself, as I said before, but also looking for validation and looking for safety. And just I think that a really big part of it for me was accepting standard issue pleasure was very uncomfortable for a variety of reasons. So seeking the aversive sensation of masochism gave me a way to connect in that felt authentic to me, that was really seeing me, because I found a lot of times in vanilla sex, I felt very overlooked because I was sort of expected to do a certain performance and expected to enjoy certain things. And I just had hit my limit for tolerance of that kind of erasure, I think very early in my sexual journey. Um, but then I think that like the more pertinent question now is, why do I continue wanting to be a sub?
Mm.
Because there are people who in their kink, they start as a sub, they become a dom, they switch, whatever. And I just continue to find so much of like desire is so mysterious because it very much comes from this sort of unspoken deep place where, at least for me, like a thing will crop up and then I have to later be like, what is this about? And I just find that I'm, one of those very stereotypical people that like I'm a boss in my regular life and I'm in charge and I know what to do and I have the executive function. I've got the planner. I'm very type A. And sexually, it just really excites me to see what happens when I let go of that. So I think
Mm.
that's sort of the driving thing, is letting go is a very lifelong practice. You don't just do it once, and I find a lot of joy in that.
Mm. We love the paradox between the who you are in the outside world and who you are in the bedroom. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the traditions on the podcast is exploring a quote with you. And today's quote is from Audre Lorde, who you mentioned before already, which is cool. And she was an American poet and author. So she once said, "The erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings." So when you hear that quote, how does it resonate with your experience of eroticism? Do you feel that your eroticism is more about chaos or about returning to the self?
Hmm. I think that's yeah, that might even be from the same essay I was thinking of, but I
Probably,
think
yeah.
that when she talks about that, I think grounding her experience in identity is really important, as it is for so many American authors. She's a Black woman and a lesbian in a feminist space at the time that was very white and very straight. And I
Mm,
think a lot of what she brought to it as a woman of color was taking in, having a more marginalized experience and yet claiming power through that and not through a white colonialist lens. So I think that, when I think about marginalized identity and desire, that when we talk about chaos, I think that it's, the way that we experience power in the outer world, I think even for people who would identify completely as vanilla, transmutes into our sexual process in a way that can be really surprising. And I do find that the erotic is a place where I make sense of how I feel, because we're not conditioned to be like, oh, I experienced this microaggression, at the bank, and therefore I feel sexy about the inverse of it, or what,
mhm,
what have you. That's not a natural like thinking mind impulse. But yeah, I do find that I do bring in sort of the disorganization of just random inputs of daily life, and then in the erotic, I find a way to have power over them, and that gives me a lot of joy. And of course, somebody might be thinking, oh, submissives are the ones that don't have power. So how can you have power in that context? But in terms of consensual dominance and submission, it's a 50-50, or I like to think of it as like a 100-100
mm,
split. Like we both bring our full selves
mhm,
and then collaborate on a way to thematically play with power together rather than like I'm actually giving it away. It's more collaborative than that. So yeah, that really makes sense to me. It's like I come to the erotic with this tangle of feelings, and then the desires will come to me as a way to sort of organize them into an understanding of where I'm at and what's been going on.
mhm. Now, you describe yourself as a submissive with occasional switch tendencies. What does this mean in day-to-day life? How does your switch show up?
Yeah, I think so. Some people, in terms of switching, will switch with the same partner, or they switch with different partners, or they switch in different periods of their life. And for me, I've always been I thought I was a switch with everybody.
Mm,
Excuse me. I thought I was a switch with everybody, but then once I met my partner, I realized that it was more like I had a bratty side that was testing partners to see if they could help, if they could hold my experience. And
mm,
rather than, I wasn't bratting out of like, I think this is fun. It was bratting very much out of place, like, I need to check if I'm safe to see what his reaction's going to be. So once I pushed those limits a few times and found that it was very firmly like, this is the deal and you are safe, I kind of melted into a puddle and felt no need to do that with him anymore. But when I talk about switching nowadays, I'm very much thinking about when we have threesomes with other women, and I sort of remember that I have like a topping streak with when in my queer sex, and I do really enjoy this sort of devious top energy that comes out of
mhm,
me. And I've definitely topped like impact play or hair pulling or things like that. And but it's very much within, like, we are the two submissives to one dominant, and then I'm doing it under his direction. I find that really fun and titillating and transgressive, and it helps me sort of be grounded in my queerness and how that shows up. And also, I'm not a sub to every single person I meet. I need that sense of autonomy or holding that power on my side, because submission is a gift to be earned. And when you're just doing pickup play with somebody new, I'm not going to give that submission to that person. So that's why I talk about it more like toppy sub rather than
mm,
I'm not being dominant with these people. I'm just exploring my top side.
mhm. So, how does power feel different in your body when you're on the giving end versus when you're receiving?
Mm. On the giving end, it feels much more no thoughts. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that mystical subspace where you kind of get to release the thinking and you just get into this flow state, and that can only happen from deep trust and negotiation, and that's why it's mainly reserved for my husband. But when I'm topping, I really enjoy that sort of sense of curation. It's like I'm a big gift giver in my day-to-day life, and I love to like think of like what could I get this person for whatever. And I think it really, that me as a top is that. It's like I know that they're going to enjoy this. And so I like to sort of deviously give and withhold. I'm very much sort of, I like to sort of dangle the carrot and then whip it away kind of vibe. So I really like watching the sort of surprise in whoever I'm topping at that,
Mm.
oh, this like gentle sub that I've been watching with her dom, like, is like, kind of, I don't know, I kind of think of it like a little bit of a mean older sister that's gonna pull your pigtail when dad's not looking. So that's how that's mainly played out, and I find it's much more in my mind, it's much more imaginative, it's more of like a game, and it has a narrative, whereas as a sub I'm just a whole. So that's where
Mm-hmm.
that goes.
I love that. Okay, so another tradition on the podcast is exploring a research article with you. And
Mm.
today's research is titled On the Margins, Considering Diversity Among Consensually Non-Monogamous or CNM relationships. So the research has found that CNM can lead to higher honesty in relationships. Is this something that you found in your marriage? And if so, how has honesty shaped your own play or dynamics?
That's such a great finding, and I'm sure absolutely true for so many people. I think we've been doing consensual non-monogamy since the beginning of our relationship, but only playing together with thirds.
Mm-hmm.
And even that experience, yeah, it does invite you into a realm where, excuse me, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. Nope. It invites you into a realm where you have to explore hypotheticals in a way that you don't really have to in monogamy, or at least that a monogamous relationship doesn't have natural intersections to explore. So we have to talk about like how would I feel if this happened, or what would you think if this happened? And it's I think relationships are just sort of a series of projections that you put on the other person, no
Mm.
matter how communicative. And that these sort of intersections to talk about how you really feel give you a chance to discover, oh, maybe they're not thinking that at all, and maybe they've changed their mind, or maybe that thing I interpreted that they said from 5 years ago maybe isn't true anymore. So, as consensual non-monogamy gives you this opportunity to sort of check on how each other are feeling and be surprised by it. And also to sort of negotiate, like, how would how did you feel when this happened? Or if there is a rupture, to repair that rupture, and just have like more touchstones for processing and how we handle conflict and how we handle big emotions. And that spills out into the rest of your life, because if you can have a conversation about how it felt when your partner, came in someone else's mouth in front of you, you can certainly talk about who's loading the dishwasher in what way. So these starts to feel very low stakes in a very helpful and constructive way.
Mm-hmm. So, stigma was a major theme in the research as well. Do you still feel that stigma in your own CNM play when you're talking about this with other people outside of your relationship?
Yeah, I think at this point I've sort of narrowed my social world to people who know what I'm about, and
Mm-hmm.
if not understand it, at least celebrate it on my behalf. So, stigma has not been a big issue for me for a long time. In terms of non monogamy, it's more about holding stigma that our thirds might be going through in their lives
Mm.
if they're newer to it, and having empathy and remembering how to time travel to a point in my life where it was newer for me. So, yeah, there have been big moments in relationships with thirds where we need to hold what's going on for them in their lives regarding stigma. But as far as my life goes, I kind of forget that it's not okay, or
Mm-hmm.
or forget how society might think about it, because it's so self-evident for me that it's a good thing. But yeah, there can be also a major fatigue about already having accepted yourself and then having to go through earlier stages with someone else. It's, you
Mm.
know, I don't know. I don't know where we're at collectively about calling consensual non-monogamy a sexual orientation, but it is very similar, I think, to when you're queer and dating someone who's closeted or just coming out of the closet. It's like, I already did this and I don't necessarily want to go backwards with you to where you're at. So that adds a further complicating factor on top of dating that can be really disappointing because you're like, I just want everyone to accept themselves, but you can't rush
Mm-hmm.
somebody else's journey.
Very well said. And lastly, the study also emphasizes diversity, and it says that no two CNM setups look the same. How would you describe what makes your version of CNM uniquely yours?
Yeah, I think that ours is exceptionally boundaried. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that CNM, because we're all trying to figure it out, there's been a heavy amount of discourse about the right way to do it. And I really enjoy CNM as a framework rather than ENM because when we bring ethics into sex and particularly into kinky sex, I think we get dizzy really fast about what's okay and have this sort of external view onto what we're doing. So our situation has always been very boundaried and very specifically hierarchical, and that at times has been considered bad. But on the ground, I see submissives coming into our dynamic as this sort of safe sandbox to play in, and then they can go away. And knowing how it works and having sort of a calm energy on our behalf lets them have enough latitude to dip in and out of something they're interested in. And that's great for some people and other people want to be on a more traditional relationship escalator. So we get to hold that and also find in it a lot of sort of calm solace in our relationship, knowing that that's exactly what the situation is. In recent years, we've had more and more dynamics that sort of cross that emotional line and kind of emotionally escalate. And I think it's a factor of me getting older and eventually and more emotionally porous and having bigger feelings almost than when I first started out. And that can be, I don't know, shattering for me if those dynamics don't work out when I'm so used to things being really boundaried and specific. So, but holding space for each individual thing to be different, even within the setup you've agreed upon, is what's sort of fun about discovering it, but can also end up leading to some pain. But pain is proof of love or,
Mm.
attachment. And that's sort of, yeah, you're putting yourself out there if you come out a little bruised sometimes.
So let's move from CNM to another three-letter acronym that is even spicier, CNC. So, CNC or consensual non consent is one of the most psychologically charged kinks. Can you share with us what your definition of CNC is and what it is about CNC that you enjoy?
This is a very well researched question because it's one of my favorite topics. CNC is so interesting because it's almost like one of the least expensive kinks. It's free anywhere you are. You can start experimenting with resistance and push pull, but it's also like one of the most expensive in terms of time that you have to invest into negotiation and discussion
Mm.
and self work. And it can be very triggering, of course, to play with that theme, either for the top or the bottom. But for me, I find in my play when we do use CNC as a theme, it feels more like we're getting away with something than doing anything triggering. Like it feels like playing with that thing that is the most wrong. And my brain really likes to be at the outermost edge of, ooh, what can't I do? And then feeling the tension of crossing that line a little bit
Mm.
within a consensual container. So, in terms of, yeah, my own CNC practice, it doesn't look like anything dramatic if you were looking at it from outside, but there can be a little bit of resistance physically, there can be verbal resistance, and there's always this sort of wink behind it of we know that we're doing something that we can get away with because we have done this work and have so much respect and care for each other. So, yeah, but I listen, I'm but a mortal human, so of course I enjoy having my wrists pinned down to the bed and pushing and going, no, 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 but
Mm-hmm.
actually it's yes, yes, yes. So that's been a really fun thing. People are always asking me, what's some vacation friendly kink? And it's well, you don't have to check consensual non-consent through the TSA lines. So it's a good one to go on the road.
I hadn't thought about it that way before. That's awesome. So, another tradition we have on the podcast is asking the guest a question sourced by the listeners. And today's question is actually on the topic of CNC. So, it's from a feminist submissive who said they have the desire to explore CNC with their partner, but they're struggling with the idea that they might enjoy CNC due to their feminist approach. So, they want to know if this is common and what's the best way to move forward with exploring this kink.
This is a really deep one, and one
Mm-hmm.
I just created a course for couples called Kink Tasting Menu, and I
Ooh.
did a whole chapter on CNC. It's on my website, askasub.com. But I did a whole chapter on CNC, and I had to sort of challenge myself to again like rediscover what might be challenging about this because of, you know, the point where I've gotten. But I think it's really important. I always use masochism as a framework for kink, but that doesn't mean that all kinksters are sadists or masochists. But in the same way that consensual masochism isn't violence, you know, violence is something that happens to us non-consensually, and masochism is something that we deliberately negotiate and enjoy. It's the same thing with CNC. You're not normalizing non-consensual sexual encounters. You're creating one together that is more of a play acting around that boundary that you're told your whole life, don't cross that boundary. It's very like, don't touch that, don't go in the candy jar, don't go in the candy jar. So if you have, you know, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that in your head, it's like how if you tell a toddler, you know, don't go over there, all they're hearing is go over there
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, so it's sort of you have to have compassion for your mind, especially as a feminist. If that's really baked into your identity, you're going to start feeling interest in the taboos that sort of define your everyday ethos, because once you get into the sexual realm, these things start to change. So it's just really, really important not to, you know, again, going back to that issue of how ethics complicate non-monogamy, bringing in this idea that what you're doing privately in your relationship is somehow affecting the movement is a really important thing to disabuse yourself of, not
Mm-hmm.
just because it is harmful to you, but also you're not like that's the activism that we're engaging in, then we're on the wrong track. We have to focus on what affects other people. So
Mm-hmm.
if you find yourself liking it, congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really deep place to explore. But as you're sort of approaching it, if you're trying to hold it in a safe way, it's very important to have the bottom initiate. I think that's sort of my overarching advice for anybody wanting to get into this. So
Mm.
as you're going into maybe a sexual encounter or a kink encounter, whatever's happening, the bottom should sort of lock eyes with the top and have the twinkle in their eye and start to go, no. Because it's
Mm-hmm.
not no, 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 stop. Like that's never really the tone for anybody's CNC that I know about. It's a playful no, and it's inviting everybody into a playful zone where we're tapping on the glass of that boundary that we've been told never to cross. And if the bottom initiates, then you're in a gentler approach than if the top is just suddenly goes off script when the bottom isn't ready for it.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Now, as part of our conversation today, I asked you to bring along something to share, such as a quote, book, or movie that's influenced your eroticism. Can you share with us what you've brought along today and how it shaped your erotic realm?
Yes, so a big shaping of my erotic realm, and I just talked about this over on my podcast. So if we have an Venn diagram, everybody, you know, we're going back to the well. The movie Secretary
Mm,
was very key for me, as you can imagine. It's sort of this foundational text of BDSM, and it's based on, or especially power exchange, dom sub dynamics. It's based on a Mary Gateskill story, of course, and came out in 2003, starring Maggie Gyllenhaal and James Spader as the secretary and boss who get into a dom sub dynamic. And I didn't see this movie actually until I was already in a dom sub dynamic, but I think it framed things for me very early in a way that was very helpful, because that movie is very explicitly textual about the idea that DS dynamics can help us heal within ourselves the stuff that we bring into the relationship, and being vulnerable and already a little broken was part of it and not something bad or wrong. The movie is very campy and intense and strange, and aesthetically doesn't live in the same world as the rest of us, but that almost highlighted the emotional truth more for me.
Mm.
So there's a scene where, so Lee, the Maggie Gyllenhaal's character, who's the sub and the secretary, is getting driven to work every day by her mom, who is very worried about her, and she's very infantilized in her home life. She lives with her parents, and Mr. Gray, which we won't reference any other franchises here, but Mr. Gray, played by James Spader, tells her, you don't need your mom to drive you to work every day. Today, you're going to walk home alone and you're going to enjoy walking home. And there's this beautiful voiceover from her as she walks through the park on her way home. And she sort of reflects on how maybe she'd never taken a walk just for the pleasure of taking a walk. And as she does so, she feels held by him. And
Mm.
that has sort of been the basis of where I built my understanding of 24/7 relationships, with Dom subs, is that when you're doing an act of self-care, it's something that you're offering to the conscious dynamic you're making with your partner. And I think that's really, really beautiful. And so big thanks to that movie that is so wacky, but actually very resonant for those of us who know what's going on.
I love that movie and I love that scene. Thank you for sharing it so vividly with
Mm-hmm.
us. Now, it sounds like you've had a lot of amazing experiences exploring your kinky self. I'd love to hear from you about a peak erotic experience that you've had, one that really ticked all of your boxes. What comes to mind in this moment when I ask you to describe a peak scene?
Mm, mm. The first thing that jumps to mind is the scene. There's a scene kind of, God, there's, obviously a lot of wonderful scenes that have happened, but there's a scene that jumps out at me from early in my training period with my husband, who was just my dom at the time, when I was I gotten a little, I was like maybe sick, maybe not sick, and we were like, he was at the time, for his work, he was like, I can't get sick. So like and normally in my relationships, it's like, oh, I'm gross and I can't be exposed to you, and this is like, oh, bad, and I'm shameful and whatever. But we externalized it into the scene with him. We, listen, I think people should all don't, do as I say, not as I do. Everyone go do your own research. He'd already been trained in this, but we saran wrapped my face in this scene with breathing holes, of course, in my mouth and in my nose. And I was, had my wrist cuffs above my head. I was standing in his doorway in his apartment with my wrist cuffs cuffed into the door frame. And for safety reasons, I want everyone to know that I could have gotten out of this bondage quite easily, had there been an earthquake, because I live in Los Angeles and your brain is always like, what if the big one happens while I'm naked in bondage? Uh, so far it hasn't. But so he had me in like this very extensive impact scene going on with the saran wrap, and I'm drooling and I feel very, very objectified. And there's slapping of the face through the plastic and the slapping of my body, and we're in this like heavy impact scene, and he has such a talent for the exact kind of sort of dismissive objectification that makes me feel very revved up. And he goes, it'd be really nice right now is a beer. I'm gonna go out to the store. I'm gonna go out to the store and get one. And he left me in the apartment tied up. Again, I could have gotten out. I didn't. And literally drove to the store and got himself like a cold beer from the local liquor store, and came back. And I was still there waiting for him. And I don't know, in my memory, he was gone like 3 minutes, but that was I was very much in subspace. And just the waiting, not everyone's kink is waiting and edging. That's very much my kink, is being not forgotten about, but being held in a state of waiting. And that was like a peak thing because it felt so wrong. And then he came back and we did the rest of the scene. And I kind of thought, like, were you just sort of hiding outside the door? And then you came back, and he's like, no, there's beer in the house now. And there wasn't before. So that was, yeah, that was one of those moments where I'm like, oh my God, I can do this. And again, this is like standing in a room, but
Mm,
using the themes of kink, it became so much more than that.
I love that. Sounds like a lot of fun. Now, I've spoken to a Dom previously who proposed to his sub by asking her to get on her knees and asking if she would say no if he instructed her to marry him. So, since you were in a 24/7 Dom sub dynamic first before you got married, I'm curious, did you have any kinky elements in your proposal or marriage?
Oh, that's yeah. In terms of the proposal, it was actually a very standard proposal.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time I saw him on his knees, and I did not
Oh.
see it coming in a major way. Like my parents were with us actually that day,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom said, "Don't you?" She knew that it was going to happen, and she goes, "Don't you want to change your clothes or maybe brush your hair?" And I was like, "Don't be weird. We're going on a walk." Like I was so offended, and so there are pictures and like literally unwashed hair wearing like a brown sack dress and my glasses. And I'm thinking, like, maybe if I'd known that this was going to be a photograph moment, but that almost makes it better. So I was very caught off guard that we didn't have, we'd had like abstract conversations about wanting to be together forever, but I didn't know necessarily that marriage was going to be part of that. So I very thrillingly got a surprise that I really wanted, and it was wonderful. But yeah, in terms of the ceremony, we did incorporate some kinky elements. So when we got married at a little elopement with some friends during the pandemic, actually in an Airbnb, and we all tested for COVID. And then we, about 10 of us got, including the photographer, got together at this amazing Airbnb. It was like a classic sort of Laurel Canyon, LA A-frame cottage, and the whole ceremony was very Wiccan, kinky, and my husband had this wonderful element where he knew approximately what time we would sort of be done with the ceremony and having our first kiss. And we had three subs at that time, thirds to our relationship, and he instructed all of them to come at that time, at that appointed time. So we had the ceremony kind of blessed by these orgasms of like my fairy god subs that were
Aw.
looking over the thing, and that was really really sweet. And then we ended up doing a second wedding in front of family and friends at a church, and the fact that it was a church to us felt very transgressive
Mm.
because we know what's going on. And yeah, there were elements of that ceremony too, where we knelt to take communion, and that felt like a little nod. And we took some very kinky pictures afterwards with our photographer, and yeah, it was really special. So we wove it in, but then also even the fact of doing so-called normative things, but knowing that we don't fit in that box was for
Mm-hmm.
us a
Mm-hmm.
thing. Yeah.
Beautiful. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners that we haven't touched upon?
Hmm. I think I want to circle back to that issue of who we are in our lives, especially politically, and how it might interact with dominance and submission if it's something that people are feeling called towards.
Mm.
And I think that it's incredibly important that if we're interested in the collective liberation of everyone, and finding not just equality but parity for all kinds of people and groups and what we all might need, that we might feel afraid of dominance and submission because we think this is unequal, but in reality it's a way to very in a tactile way play with power and understand it in a deeper manner, so that when we go out into the world and we want to be activists, and so many of us are watching rising fascism in the places where we live, and white supremacy and colonialism, and all of these intersecting factors. And so those things might make us think power is bad. But in order to redistribute power, I think we need to have a really close working relationship with it in a consensual manner. And so if you feel yourself called, but you're resisting it based on that means, I actually think that you're almost building a little model of how the world could be. And I think it's
Mm.
a really beneficial thing for everyone to engage in. So it's not actually contrary to your politics, it's inviting you to understand your politics on a much deeper level.
Mm. I love that. It's so important to understand power, and kink is the most fun way to explore it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the
Mm-hmm.
one where, P is free, CNC is free, do it at home, don't have to go anywhere. And then you come away with this sort of deeper spiritual understanding of all people being interconnected. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's my flag. I'm out here waving it on the daily, and if it appeals to anyone else, come on in. The water's fine.
So, where can listeners find your work if they want to explore more about you and what you have to offer?
A really great hub for my work that sort of encompasses all of it is Substack. So I'm at askasub.substack.com. And Substack is not just a platform for subs, it's a newsletter platform where you can subscribe and you can get essays from me about sexuality. There's a big old archive. I've got a great piece on there about feminism and kink. And you can also get my podcast there, but you can get Ask a Sub on the podcast player of your choice. Head over to my website, askasub.com/courses to look into those deeper learning resources. And of course, people love to support me on Patreon because we have a beautiful Discord community there where people can connect and find new friends. And that's patreon.com/askasub.
Brilliant. So, if you had to sum up your erotic self in one word right now, what would it be and why?
Whole. And honestly in a deep way, because I think that when I say I am whole or anybody else does, it's sort of this state of being accepting and receptive and turning off your thinking brain. And I come to eroticism to have a break from the incessant thoughts. And when you truly apotheose into simply whole, you you get a really lovely break from all of that.
I love the humor as well. Okay. I'd like to thank you for sharing your erotic realm with us today, Lina, and for all you do for the community. Your desire to help others explore their desire is something I strongly resonate with, and I look forward to seeing where your journey takes you next.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love this pod, and I can't wait to see where it goes and the space it creates for people to own their erotic selves.
Thank you. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm podcast. Thank you for listening to the Erotic Realm. If this episode stirred something in you, please take a moment to follow the show, leave a rating, or write a review on wherever you're listening. It helps more people find the show and brings visibility to this deeper conversation about eroticism and self-understanding. I'd also like to invite you to dive deeper into the psychology of desire, including my writing, research, and upcoming courses over at psychologyofdesire.com. And if you want the full experience, join thousands of curious minds on my Substack at psychologyofdesire.substack.com. This is where I release the Psychology of Desire case files, behind-the-scenes thoughts, and intimate reflections every week, plus more. Until next time, stay curious, stay embodied, and keep exploring. Also, as always, stay perverted.